Last week, we had a hard time finding good alternatives to re-signing T. Higgins. What about alternatives to extending Trey Hendrickson? Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien, and we are Locked On Bengals on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For those of you who are new to the show, we've been covering the Bengals for, well, a pretty dang long time now, doing this show together for 5 years, and both of us have done the podcast independently before that for more years, and so you're in the right place if you're looking for a daily spot to get your Bengals fix, news, analysis, everything that you need to know about the Cincinnati Bengals in the right place. So everydayers, welcome back. You already know that, and you can find the show on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcast. So however you need to get your fix, we're there for you. And James, today we're going to spend a whole lot of time talking about Trey Hendrickson and the decision to extend or trade him, because that is the decision that he has presented with the front office despite having 1 year left on that contract. And the search for alternatives will be part of today's show, but we've had a lot of people messaging us or asking us questions on social media or in the replies on YouTube comments in the last few weeks about whether it's actually worth paying Trey Hendrickson top of market money. And so we should probably start there when doing this analysis before we look at the free agency class, before we talk about some Madden-esque trade ideas later in the show.
Yeah, let's start there. There's certainly some questions, right? I think part of that is Trey Hendrickson's age. Part of it is something that I mentioned. Like, our everydayers probably remember this during the season. After the Raiders game, a few games after that, it was like, man, Trey Hendrickson, and it was Joe, Jamar, and Trey are playing at such an elite level. How are they so bad? Right? A lot of people said that. Heck, Joe said that. And I'm like, yeah, Joe and Jamar are awesome. And then there is a gap between those two and Trey. And you know, that's still true. I think that's true. I also think that you can take that and say, oh, well, Trey's impact isn't worth paying him at 30 years old. And I think that's where some people are, is they look at the impact. They look at the when some of these sacks occurred, the fact that this Bengals defense didn't get off the field in key moments in all of those one-score losses. 7 of their 8 losses were by 1 score. And then you put it on Trey. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do think there are people that, and who knows, maybe some of them are within the Bengals organization, that agree with that to a certain extent. And that's what's interesting about this is as we explore the alternatives to just signing Trey Hendrickson to a long-term contract, which obviously he wants, how much do you want to go down the rabbit hole of clearly your best defensive player isn't as good as the numbers say? Because that's what that's doing. Not that it's wrong and you should do that. That's self-evaluation. I'm not there, but I do think that there are people that are there, especially because he is 30 years old.
Yeah, I think the aging concern is certainly one of the concerns. There is age-related fall-off that you could expect to see from Trey Hendrickson in the next few years, but a lot of age-related fall-off for pass rushers that has been discussed with aging charts, with looking at historical trends of what happens to edge rushers when they hit 30, when they hit 31. I think that when you look at players that have had the kind of success that Trey has had over the last couple of years, those numbers look different. And I went and looked at players that had 17 sack seasons, 16 plus sack seasons when they were 30. That success, when it wasn't a one-hit wonder, because there are a number of players that come out of nowhere and suddenly, after being like 3 sack players for their entire NFL career, have a 15 sack season when they turn 30 and then return to relative obscurity and have another 3 sack season.
Yeah.
You know, but Trey has had this consistent success, and you can point out who the opposition is, but he's also played really well against Kansas City numerous times. And I know they've had tackle issues, but Patrick Mahomes is still hard to get on the ground.
He put them in the 4th and 16.
Yep.
Like the reason they were in the 4th and 16 is because of Trey.
And
a must-win game. Yeah.
And in that game, I was talking about how Trey Hendrickson almost single-handedly won the game. And I'll not forget that, obviously, until I forget that game when my memory stops working. But he did a lot to keep the Bengals defense in that game. So did, Cam Taylor-Britt at the time, had an awesome interception, his probably best play of the year early in that game. But he also has performed well in the AFC North. And I know Lamar Jackson is his own thing. But, people talk about he doesn't beat elite tackles is something that I've heard in the last couple of weeks. I've heard about the age thing. I looked at the age thing. If there's a little bit of age-related falloff for Trey Hendrickson, you're still talking about a really good player. He's been
still worth it. Yep.
Really good and hasn't shown those signs of age-related decline yet in 4 straight really good years for the Bengals. So it depends on what he's asking for, I guess. If he's asking for like a 4-year extension, then you probably don't touch that if you're the Bengals. But when I've done the exercise, it's been a 2-year extension. So we've heard about the age thing. The play against elite tackles is something that I think is true for most edge rushers in the NFL. Elite tackles are not going to get as much production against. You mentioned the 1-score game thing. I don't know if you saw in the last week. I think it was a few days ago. PFF put out a tweet. Trey Hendrickson led the NFL in sacks in 1-score games in 2025. And then you just consider the elephant in the room, which is he's the only guy. He's the only guy creating on that Bengals defensive line. He's the only guy with a really good pass rush win rate and is demanding a lot of attention, is getting a lot of chips. And so if you add to that, and he's not the only guy, his job gets easier, or he makes the job easier for the other pass rushers that you add around him or that you're hoping to develop around him. And they haven't had that at least for a couple of years now. They haven't had that other pass rushing presence. And I think that's why when you look at overall pass rushing performance for the Bengals and you think, well, Trey's not good enough. Well, Trey's everything they have. And so we'll get to some Madden trade ideas, like I said, much later. But I think that anything that's isolating, Trey not winning in certain spots or anything like that really needs to take into account that he's doing so much of this by himself.
Well, and let's just call it what it is. He's not the best pass rusher in the NFL. He's not second. He's not third. That's okay. It's okay. He's not the best defensive end, the second best defensive end, the third best defensive end. He's not. But that doesn't mean that he shouldn't be on your team or that he's not worth extending. Like there's a difference between saying, oh, he's not Micah Parsons or he's not Myles Garrett to, oh, you don't pay him. Those are far and away different things. Like, oh, there are flaws in his game. He's not as versatile, or he doesn't tip as many balls, or he doesn't like, okay, what does he do? He does the thing that the Bengals signed him to do. Remember when they signed him and there were questions? It was like, oh, well, what? They were like, yeah, he gets sacks. They nailed it. Arguably the best free agent signing in Bengals history. Probably the best free agent signing in Bengals history. And so if you're painting the path to this defense being much improved this year, do you want to do it with Trey, where you ease him into age 31, age 32, and then probably he does sign elsewhere, I would say, as he goes into another phase of his career, and still have him on the team, or go the other way? And for me, it's really tough. It's a tough sell. It isn't impossible. I have some of those trade ideas that we'll get to. It isn't impossible to find that path. But the path isn't, oh, well, let's get the 30th pick for Trey Hendrickson, and that's going to be what they should do. The goal is to win right now. The goal is to be in Santa Clara in 12 months and have a Super Bowl parade that the Eagles had last Friday, have that here in Cincinnati. Like, that's the goal. And so if that's the goal, it's going to be a really hard sell for the Trey Hendrickson improves them in 2025 alternative path. Part of that has to do with free agency. We will get to that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. And the NBA season, now that the All-Star break is over, it's a sprint to the playoffs. And all of these teams are trying to get in. And with the NBA action heating up, there's no better place to get in on all the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment interesting, whether it's college basketball. When the Reds start, of course, you can live bet the Reds. You can live bet any and everything you're thinking of. Oh, and by the way, they do have Bengals futures on there as well. So don't delay. Get to FanDuel.com where new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
We'll take a look at this free agent class in just a second, but just to reiterate, what we're talking about with Trey Hendrickson, as far as an extension, is probably, in my mind, I don't know what he's asking for. And if he's asking for more than this, maybe it does get tricky and you start to explore some of these alternatives a little bit more seriously. But if he's looking for a, say, top 5 or 6 edge rusher APY and a 2-year extension, is a 2-year extension enough? That would be my question. If he needs 3 years, even then I'm exploring it, because the final year of defensive player, or really any player, contract in the NFL at this point, but especially defensive players, especially the way the Bengals do contracts, is essentially a team option.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to see that with a number of players the Bengals cut this offseason. The Bengals will have an option in the last year of Trey's deal, whether it's a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal, to decide whether or not he's still playing up to that standard. And they can make a decision at that point if they need to. But if he continues to play well, then you just have a player under contract who's good and who you can build around. And so I don't think you're talking about over $30 million for Trey Hendrickson. The current top paid edge rusher is over $30 million. And there are going to be some guys that reset that market this year. But like you said, despite his pass rushing prowess, he is not a complete player the way that some of those really top guys are. He is a top pass rusher in the NFL. I would say top 5 pass rusher in the NFL. But as far as complete edge defenders, there's obviously a couple of guys that do the whole thing at a bit of a higher level than Trey. And so I don't think he's quite getting to those numbers. He was just second in defensive player of the year. That will increase his price tag, I think. I think there's that factor. But I don't think you're talking about anything crazy. Like, even if you're talking about 2 years, $27 million a year, and you're going to put 15, 17, 18 million up front in the signing bonus pro rate, I think that is well within the risk tolerance that the Bengals should have and would be well worth it for Trey, because it's still like that option year in the future is there if he does start to fall off. The Bengals aren't totally exposed here unless Trey totally changes in tune in terms of asking for future guaranteed money that he hasn't asked for in the previous 2 deals that he's agreed to with the Bengals.
Yeah, I think there is a limit. I would be really hesitant to do it. He's under contract this year, just so you know. So just for those wondering. So a 3-year extension, talking about the next 4 years, he'd be under contract as long as probably a year shy of Jamar. I think a 2-year deal gets it done, a 2-year extension. You're right. That upfront money, that bonus money works. And he's under contract. That does limit. I know people don't want this and they just want Trey to make all the money in the world. It's still a negotiation. And that's why Duke Tobin made the comments he made last month. It's like, yeah, we think he deserves a raise. But then he stopped short of saying, oh yeah, we're going to make him the highest paid because they don't want to. And they shouldn't. He's not deserving of that. And I think that's, some people hate that because they love Trey. Fine. But unless you're the complete package, where you're an elite pass rusher, elite run defender, on the edge, can move to both sides, do all these, then you're not making 30 plus million APY when you're not in free agency. And that's the other element here. What the market is different when you have a year left on your contract versus when you're a free agent and free to go anywhere. And that's such an important note. Like, the Bengals can pay Trey Hendrickson market money, which is probably $27 million per year. And that doesn't mean that that's what he would get on the free agent market. When you're in the free agent market, everything's driven up because there's such a a demand for your services, especially this year, and it's an easy way to transition to free agency. I think Trey Hendrickson would far and away be the top pass rusher if he was a free agent on the market and would get the most money out of any of these guys, and maybe the most money, period. Might get more than T, probably not. It depends on where you would think T would end up. If T ends up just at 30, Trey could certainly exceed that. I think T would get more if he hit free agency too. The point is, Trey doesn't have that. He has one more year left. And so do you want it to get really ugly, or do you want to stay here like Joe says you do and like you say you do? Well, if so, and they offer you market money, then it should be pretty cut and dry of how they get to a path where he's here for the next few years.
Just for comparison's sake, as we dive into the unrestricted free agent class, the top free agent edge rusher, according to PFF's rankings, just in terms of the contract they're projecting for Khalil Mack, who's 4 years older, to be fair, but still, again, another guy playing at a really high level for the last 2 years for the Chargers, into his 30s, still a good player. He's projected to get 2 years, $22.5 million per year. 4 years older, so that number would be higher for Trey, but that is the highest projected contract for any edge rusher that PFF has. Like Chase Young, 2 years, 17.5. Malcolm Kuntz, 2 years, almost 19. Josh Sweat, 3 years, 18 per year. These are all per year numbers, to be totally clear about that. But this edge market in free agency doesn't have those top end guys that are going to be pushing the top of the market. That Trey, to your point, would if you were in free agency, but also this is a frame of reference for those that think, oh, Trey's going to need more than $30 million. Well, I don't really think that's where the edge market is right now. Like the top of it certainly will go there. And if Trey Hendrickson thinks he should be making what Micah Parsons is about to make this offseason, or what Myles Garrett's new deal looks like, then the Bengals might have a problem there. But by every indication we've had, that doesn't seem to be what the ask is from Trey Hendrickson.
No. And history says that they can find common ground. You know, I think, and by the way, his agent needs to get a deal done. It's the other factor here. His agent really screwed Trey when he agreed to that 1 year extension in during camp in 2023. And that's why Trey was unhappy last year. Let's be real. He has 17.5 sacks. And he's under contract for the next 2 years. And he's like, man, I want more money. This is crazy. He'd be set to become a free agent right now. And the Bengals would be in a much different situation and probably would have given him more money last offseason to prevent this from happening. And so it's Harold, I believe. I forget his last name. But if you're Trey's agent, you want to get something done. And that doesn't mean act in total desperation here, but you want to get that cash to him, especially when you look at what these other edge rushers are making. Trey's been underpaid. He's trying to get back to market. All right, we'll get that done. Get that market value for him. Because otherwise, he's not getting to the market. He's not becoming a free agent. He's not even the best edge rusher on the trade market. That's Myles, right? Like that's the other element here. He's not the best defensive end available. And the Browns can debate all they want. Oh, Myles isn't available. He is, and he's the big fish. And so teams that are looking for that are probably starting with 95 and then would pivot to 91. The point is that would delay things a lot. So if the Bengals are aggressive here, I don't know why. And by aggressive, I just mean offering him two for 54, like you said. I think if you get that cash flow early on, I think that's going to work. I really do. And at the same time, the alternative paths, did anyone that was listening or watching hear Jake say a name? Obviously, you would love Khalil Mack in stripes. With Trey, you're not saying, oh, well, yeah, trade Trey and sign Khalil Mack. That solves it. Not in the year 2025. In 2015, absolutely. Sounds great. Khalil Mack was like drafted in 13, something like that. Like he was about to enter his prime. So that to me would be the other element of this, is it's not like you could say trade Trey, get an asset or two, and then you can sign two of these edge rushers that make a ton of sense and are going to be long-term options as well.
Yeah, when you look at the free agency class, which we should talk about in a little bit more depth here, I think the top end answer is just not there. Anybody that you're signing, you're not getting your lead dog on your defensive line in this free agency class, really at any position. The draft, however, seems pretty good on the defensive line. And there is this trade market. And so there are some options out there, but like you said, James, like do they feel better when you're supplementing a couple more years of Trey Hendrickson, or when
Are you
when you're
trying to win
replacing
now?
it and
You
trying
trying
to
to win
start
now?
over there? That's
Yeah.
a lot harder. We'll continue that conversation. Look at these free agents and some of those Madden trade ideas to finish up the show next.
It's just really hard, Jake, to find. It's why Trey Hendrickson is the best, arguably the best free agent signing in team history. It's really hard to find that and find that value. And that doesn't mean they can't, but is their path to winning sooner easier with Trey or without Trey? And I do think that there would be some that would say, again, like I'll just sum up kind of what we said: 30, limited, good pass rusher, not much else. AFC North, you can sign the pass rusher from the Eagles for 18 million per.
Josh Sweat.
Josh Sweat. You can sign Josh Sweat for 18 million per. A lot of people thought he could have been Super Bowl MVP. Sign him, then you get another asset. You're saving money, and you take that asset and invest it in one of these other weaknesses. And Sweat gives you 90% of what Trey gives you, or 95% of what Trey gives you. What would you? And you have money to add a defensive tackle or add someone else. How would you feel about that? Let's say they went that route, and it's all right, we're going to pay Josh Sweat, who's 28. We're going to trade Trey for the 30th pick in the draft. So you have Sweat in the 30th pick and $8 million extra to play with. What do you think?
I think that return, in terms of the trade return, is probably more than I would expect to get for Trey. So let's start there. I don't think late first round.
I agree with you, but a lot of people do.
Yeah,
a lot of people are thinking first rounder. Yeah,
that's like best case outcome. So you get that first round pick. You're probably then spending one of your 2 first round picks that you now have on an edge rusher, which is fine. I think there's some edge rushers worth a first round pick. I think the Mike Green fantasy seems to be petering out a little bit if that's who you really want, the Marshall edge rusher with phenomenal data and really fun tape. It looks like he's destined for the top 10 at this point. Then I would start asking questions about Josh Sweat. So I've asked questions about the return already. I would then start asking questions about Josh Sweat, who I think is a solid player. And I like Josh Sweat as a player. And $18 million per year isn't crazy. That's pretty similar to what the Bengals did with Trey Hendrickson 4 years ago, 2021, when they signed him and he was coming off a career best year. It wasn't exactly a career best year for Josh Sweat, but he was more of a rotational player coming off a Super Bowl team, making big plays in that Super Bowl. But he's on a defensive line that is absolutely stacked. And so I start asking questions about guys leaving the Eagles. And that's where I go second. And so you got another $8 million. And I'm thinking, okay, where do you spend that? Are you hoping for like a bounce back kind of season from Baron Browning? Are you hoping that you can get Azeez Ojulari to be a breakout player after there was some interest in the way he played against the Bengals when the Bengals played the Giants? And I'm out on Azeez Ojulari, just to be clear. A lot of unblocked pressures for his production, a lot of unblocked sacks. And then, like, who else are you talking about? Chauncey Golston, the non-Micah Parsons pass rusher in Dallas, on a pretty good defensive front in terms of pass rushing between Micah and Osa and DeMarcus Lawrence when he was playing a couple of games. Or so looking at 30-year-old Dante Fowler, like, I just don't see where you're putting that $8 million if you're looking for an edge player. And that's what you're looking for instead. Versus Trey, and we talked about, they have all of these resources anyway, that they could go get any of those guys to be a supplemental piece. And when you're talking about one of those guys being a rotational piece to go along with Trey and Myles Murphy and whatever else they draft or add elsewhere,
it's just different.
It's so different because you have that top end guy at least.
And Trey Hendrickson's worth $10 million more than Josh Sweat. That's the other like. Do you have any doubt? I think Trey would get 30+ million in free agency if he was a free agent.
I'm still skeptical of that generally, just because I don't know where the edge market is going. That would be a whole lot of players breaking 30 million at the edge rusher position that haven't been there before, but it'd probably be close if it's not 30.
But let's say Sweat gets 18 and then Trey's at 28. Well, that's it. It's like, do you want the quality Or do you want to go the quantity route, which we've seen the Bengals get burned on because it's really hard. It's hard to get that right. Even if guys have made plays in big games and been on playoff teams and had playoff success and all of those things, like, Trey and what he brings. So that replacing that's really tough to do. Finding guys that can build around him and help make his life easier and bolster your pass rush, I think is much, much simpler than finding a true top dog, which he clearly still is. Before we get to the trades, do you have anything else, any other ideas? Because clearly he would be the top edge rusher in free agency. Clearly he would have a huge market. I think he would easily get 3 years if he was a free agent right now, which is, if you're the Bengals, you're signing up to extend him and keep him for the next 3 years, I would say, on a 2-year extension.
I do think if you could get that kind of first round return and your plan for free agency was then to go get Josh Sweat and Chase Young and draft a guy in the first round.
Sure.
I mean, we're getting into Madden territory already there, right? But you're talking about spending on a former number 1 pick level prospect in Chase Young, who's been a little bit disappointing in the NFL, but it still had some quality play. It's not like he's been a total bust. He's been a bust relative to his draft status, I think that's fair to say, but he's been a solid player. And Josh Sweat, who I do like as a player, don't get me wrong, I think he's a good player. And so you get those guys. You get Myles Murphy, hoping for some development there. You maybe bring back Cam Sample. You've got Cedric Johnson in the building already. And then you draft a guy at the top end too. That's a lot of resources, though, you're talking about putting in there. That's 2 big contracts after you traded away a big contract and a draft pick. So a lot of resources. That could work. That might be what's necessary. And then you got to also figure out the defensive tackle position, right? Maybe 30, the pick you acquire there is your defensive tackle, and you're using 17 on an edge rusher. And then you're talking about totally revamping with a ton of resources at defensive line. But it's a ton of resources. And so I think you have to consider that cost. And
there would still be questions. Can Chase Young be an every down guy? Is Myles Murphy going to be that guy? Is he going to develop? Can Josh Sweat be the guy to have it sack guy, or is it like, even in that scenario, it's like, all right, well, can they find playing time for Sweat, who they're paying a lot of money to, Chase Young and Myles Murphy and this new first round edge? Like, be a great problem to have if they all work out, but there's still some questions there.
That's like what the Eagles do, right? Like, you draft Walter Nolan because he's falling maybe at 30. You get James Pierce maybe at 17. That's the Eagles approach, right? You just throw all of these resources at it, or Mike Green if you can get him at 17.
Sure, and there are going to be people that say do that, and fine if you do that, but you got to get it right. And I think that's part of the equation here, and that's why, like, if I was trading Trey, I would be thinking so big that you can't get it wrong. I would be thinking, all right, I'd call Dallas and I'd say, you know who I would love to pay? I would love to pay Micah Parsons $35 million per year. That's what I would love to do if I'm the Bengals. And they're somewhere. Mike Brown is like, what are you serious, James? Are you kidding me? No, I would call Dallas. I would offer him 17 and Trey for Micah right now. You never know with Jerry Jones. I'd throw in a couple McGriddles, some salt packets on the side. Only real ones will understand the joke there. But you get the point. Is it that, to me, now you're like, all right, well, the age isn't a factor. You clearly know he's a stud. That there's no harm in having a Micah Parsons, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow core. Go for it. So I would offer 17 and Trey Hendrickson for Micah Parsons. Dallas would probably shoot it down, but I would. That's my first one I'll throw out there.
Yeah, you could throw Max Crosby into that mix as well. I mean, the Browns would never do it, but certainly if the Browns were not in the division, you'd be talking about Myles Garrett too. The issue with those trades is probably just Trey's age. Like, trading an older pass rusher for a younger pass rusher. Yeah, even if you throw in draft capital, is going to be a hard sell for the team acquiring that player in that contract when they could just pay the guy they have.
What would you throw in? So Trey for Max, are you giving 17 up? I would not do that much.
I don't know. You put me on the spot for trying to figure out trade compensation. I would have to think about it longer.
Micah would be 17, no brainer for me. I might even throw in a 4. I honestly, because Micah's just, I mean, he's a dude, man. he's how old is he? 25?
He's definitely young. But we're talking about Madden trade ideas.
25,
right?
He's 25.
you get why I've been referring to it this way for the entire show. You're talking about trading for top of their game, if especially Micah, like all pro level players. Not to say that Trey isn't, he just was one, but he's older. A 5-year difference is a lot in the NFL, and either way, you're paying those players. So, like finding the delta in draft compensation to make those trades happen is pretty difficult. And then you're talking about again spending all these resources when instead you could just pay Trey and then add to it with the resources that you would instead be spending on trading him, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does. I have one. I just have to look up the contract here. I have another idea. This one's interesting. All right. Would you trade Trey Hendrickson for 28-year-old Quentin Nelson straight up?
I don't think I would.
Okay. He has 2 years left on his contract.
But the Colts connection, Lou Anarumo connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because what that does is that solves that issue, and then you can still attack if you want to attack pass rusher and free agency. You do that, and you have a top of the.
What is the contract?
So he signed a 4-year. He signed a 4-year, $80 million extension. He has 2 years left on that. They have an out this year, which obviously they won't get out of. His cap hit this year is $22 million. Cap hit next year, 24.
How much of that cap hit is a signing bonus, though? What was the
signing prorations? All right, so it was 6.2 each year.
Okay, so that knocks your cap hit down for the acquiring team, $6 million.
Yeah, so it'd be 16 million. Be 16 million and 18 million basically, which is
so Quentin Nelson, and then you signed Josh Sweat for Trey Hendrickson. Yeah, that's kind of the idea there.
Yeah,
roughly.
And you're asking the Bengals to sign spend top of the market money at guard for an elite guard, so it's worth it, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tricky. I do think the Bengals would look at this and say, "Would you rather have Trey if it's 30? Would you rather have Trey for 30?" And then they would turn around and be like, "Would you rather have Trey for 30 or Sweat for 18 and say like Dayo Odeyingbo for 15?" And that's a little bit more than Trey, but it's 2 players, or do they just want to, or do they just want to bank on developing Myles Murphy, which is probably what they would do.
I mean, Quentin Nelson is instantly the highest paid guard in Bengals history in this scenario,
Oh, yeah.
So, but I think I would do it. I would do it. I
don't know that the Colts would think about trading Quentin Nelson. Are they thinking about trading Quentin Nelson?
I don't know.
I think that's you're deep into the Madden territory at that point.
But those are the type of ideas. Like, let's say things don't go well with trade negotiations. Those are the type of ideas that Luka Doncic got traded. Okay, Myles Garrett should get traded. Nothing should be off limits. If you have the NFL sack leader and you're going to entertain trading him, which I would do if you can't agree to a long-term deal, then, if he's dead set on 3 years, it's a 3-year extension, I'm definitely entertaining. But it would be very targeted. It wouldn't be, we'll just send me a first-round pick offer and then you get an offer to 2 and a 4. Like, I'm not doing it for a 2 and a 4. I want a guy. I want a real dude. Quentin Nelson, real dude. Micah Parsons, real dude. Want real dudes.
Yep. There are some alternatives that I think are.
Would you trade T and Trey for Justin Jefferson?
There are some ideas here that are more interesting than what we talked about with T, I would say. Like,
for sure.
Combining 2 top-end edge players on the free agent market this year that are depth pieces, to be clear, like not top-end edge rushers, but are like top 20 edge rusher kind of players. And then adding in the draft, like, you can rebuild it. I think that is interesting. But again, it's a lot of resources that you're putting all into the defensive front. And so if that's where you want to focus all of your resources, I do think there is an alternative there that is more interesting than the T. Higgins alternatives that we couldn't really find last week when we talked about that and explored that topic. But I still think it's really hard. And the easier thing to do is to just extend Trey and then go ahead and use your ample financial resources and draft resources to bolster your defensive line when you have Trey on the team.
Yeah, I the more I think about it with the Colts one, I'll throw in Jermaine Pratt. Trey and Jermaine for Quentin Nelson.
There you go.
I would do it. I would do that. There you go.
Let us know what you think in the comments. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.
So you wouldn't do the Justin Jefferson deal?